LinkedIn presents.
Mindfulness is a practice, and in this case, a practice that doesn't always make perfect. I'm Aarons-Mele, and this is The Anxious Achiever, the show that looks at the intersection of mental health and work and asks, how can we do both better?
From LinkedIn News, I'm Leah Smart, host of Everyday Better, an award-winning podcast dedicated to personal development. Join me every week for captivating stories and research to find more fulfillment in your work and personal life. Listen to Everyday Better on the LinkedIn Podcast Network, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Did you know that small and medium businesses make up 98% of the global economy, but most B2B marketers still treat them as a one-size-fits-all? LinkedIn's Meet the SMB report reveals why that's a missed opportunity and how you can reach these fast-moving decision makers effectively. Learn more at linkedin.com/meet-the-SMB.
Anyone else out there just need to take a breath? I love this conversation we're sharing with you today because it's with a truly influential leader in mindfulness meditation in the United States, Sharon Salzberg. Sharon is someone who's inspired me throughout my career, and it's so great to hear how she got started in the world of Buddhist meditation, how her practice has changed over time, and what she thinks about how mindfulness should and shouldn't affect our working lives today. We're reminded as achievers that the goal of meditation and being mindful, it's not to win, it's not to get things perfect, it's not to set a personal best, and that this practice will feel different each and every day. But the important part is to set a routine to truly practice, no matter how long you've got. You'll learn a lot here, and stay tuned through the end of the conversation because Salzberg guides us through a short practice, one that I really needed right now, and that you just might need too. We start with the story behind how Salzberg discovered meditation in the first place.
I went to India when I was a college student on an independent study program to study meditation. I got permission to create this project. I went in 1970, and I began my first meditation retreat in January of 1971. So, as my friends say, before it was cool.
Before.
I was doing it way before. And I came back, finished school, went back to India. And when I left India in 1974, it was with the instruction of one of my teachers, this woman named Deepa, to teach myself, which I also thought was ridiculous, but she said, when you go back to the States, you'll be teaching. And I thought, no, I won't. But of course, as life unfolded, she was correct. And, in those days, I'd be at a party or some social situation and people would say, what do you do? And I'd say, I teach meditation. And they'd kind of like go, oh, that's weird. And sort of sidle away. Or occasionally somebody would ask me, did you meet the Beatles over there? I'd say, no, sadly, they went when I was in high school and there was different tradition altogether. But, and then through the years, I've watched, of course, with some amazement where, I think largely because of the science and the research and really the relanguaging, it's a much greater understanding that meditation, mindfulness doesn't need to be tied to a belief system or a faith tradition. It's about learning how to pay attention differently. And, so then I'd be at that same kind of situation and I'd be introduced as a meditation teacher and people would say, I'm so stressed out. I could use some of that. Or occasionally I'd hear, my partner should really meet you. It'd be really good for them. And, and time has gone on. And I'd say back when I was still going to parties and social situations, the most common comment I would hear was, oh, I tried that once, I failed at it.
Yeah.
And of course, we don't believe you can fail at it at all. So that brings up the question is, what do people expect and what's the understanding about what's going to happen? But we're definitely in a whole other era.
We'll talk about the failure concept in a little bit, but one quote that I think, I can't remember if you wrote it, if you said it, but I have it as from when you went to India. You said, "I felt not on the margins for the first time in my life."
Yeah.
What did that experience in learning meditation do for you?
I think it actually began before I went to India. It was one of the reasons I went to begin with. I took an Asian philosophy course when I was a sophomore. I'm a product, I should also say, of the New York City public school system,
Mm-hmm.
which means I skipped 2 grades. So I went to college when I was 16, went to India when I was 18. There was a philosophy requirement, and I just looked at the schedule. I saw an Asian philosophy course, and I thought, oh, that looks convenient. It's like on Tuesday or something. Let me do that one. And it was actually in the context of the course that shift you're describing began, because when the instructor was talking about Buddhism, he talked, of course, about the Buddha's very famous kind of commentary on the suffering in life. And, that suffering is a natural and an inevitable part of life. And for many people, that's sort of a depressing message and a real turnoff. But for me, it was maybe the first time in my life I felt like, oh, you're not so weird. Because I, like many people, had a very traumatic, painful childhood, and I felt different. My family didn't look like anybody else's family. I was living with my grandparents for a big chunk of it, for example. And my mother died when I was 9. My father was already gone, and so, but there I was in that class, and somehow that message came to me that this is part of life, not that we all suffer in the same measure or the same degree, but it's inevitable. You're not so different. You're not left out. And then I heard in the class that there were methods, there were techniques that people used called meditation to be a lot happier. So I was going to college in Buffalo, New York. I looked around Buffalo. I did not see it anywhere. And I thought, I'm going to create an independent study project and go to India, which was ridiculous. I'd never even been to California. I was 18 years old.
But did the message of suffering make you feel heard? Like what was that about? Because you're right. And I think the failure question, a lot of people feel is they think, I don't want to suffer. I want to take a pill and feel better.
Yeah.
What about you made that suffering concept attract you?
Well, I think partly because my family system, like many, was one where the conflict, the loss, pain was never spoken about, and so my internal sense of what was real was one thing, and the external confirmation of it was quite another. And this was the first time there was sort of like confirmation writ large, like this is a part of life. It's not just you, because of course the presentation is that everyone else's family is perfect, and
right.
And no one's suffering at all, and, it's so hard to have compassion for yourself if you feel that it's all only you, and because then, of course, it brings up the concomitant thought, it must be my fault.
Right.
And so to have that sense of, oh, this is a part of life, I am a part of life, was incredibly important. And I think, sometimes we meet on the terrain of suffering where we can't genuinely meet anywhere else. And it's being the most vulnerable, it's being the most honest, it's leaving aside, kind of titles or job descriptions and saying, yeah, it's rough,
It's rough out there.
Things are really hard.
I do want to talk about suffering and anxiety on this show, because this is a show for people who have mental health struggles. I was watching a video that you did it was called Anxiety, Addiction, and Depression, and dealing with them in the way of the Buddha. And I think you said something like, there's something reassuring about even saying the words addiction, anxiety, and depression, because it's inclusive. We're gathering together and we may have these horrible things, but if we can be together and talk about it, it makes connections.
Well, I think it's the most healing thing of all, because there is the problem, whatever the problem is, and that's genuine suffering. And I think we shouldn't discount that. One of my favorite sayings, apparently, because friends have started sending me mugs and cups with things I often say on them, So one came through that said, something's just hurt.
Yeah.
Something's just hurt. And I think we do ourselves a grave disservice by thinking, I should be better at this, why is this such a drag? It's a drag because something's really hurt. And it's not our bad attitude. It's not our wrong way of thinking. It's not that we need to be more receptive. Something's just really hurt. And it's also true that we might add to that things that are what I call extra suffering, which we don't need. Like a sense of isolation. It's only me.
Mm-hmm.
A sense of perpetuity. This is going to last the rest of my life. No, this is never going to change. A sense of blame. I should have been able to stop this. Like, I've been meditating for 50 years now. Why am I still feeling this? Or whatever it is. And those things we really learn through mindfulness as one method, to catch as it's creeping into our mind stream and letting go of that, because that we don't need.
Do you still feel anxiety? Would you consider yourself an anxious person?
I feel everything. I mean, I would never say I didn't feel something. It's sort of a funny mix of anxiety and withdrawal, Like, I have friends who are massively anxious. Like, my friend Sylvia Borstein will describe herself as a recovering catastrophizer. She says she's 85 now, and she got interested in meditation because she was haunted by those thoughts. Now, she may have exactly the same thoughts, but she can laugh at them, or she can at least hold them in, I don't know yet, perspective. Like, she says, she'd call one of her adult children, so her children are in their 60s. I'll call one of my adult children, they don't answer the phone. Well, they must be dead. She said, it never occurs to me that they're taking a shower, or they fell in love, they don't feel like talking to their mother. And that used to haunt her. But now there's so much more space around it, even if the same thought is arising, that she really can laugh at it and wait and see, call back,
Call back.
And interestingly enough, she describes herself as somebody who, in an actual emergency or problem, she's like a rock. She's totally steady.
Yep.
It's all the imagination in her mind that gets her going. So I'm not an anxious person like that. I don't tend to catastrophize, but there's a certain feeling that I get where things are out of control, things are crazy, someone's son just went to jail, someone else's, partner is having a mental health crisis, and there's something in me that says, oh, this is how things are supposed to feel. Because this is how they felt my whole childhood, And I think, oh, this is natural, this is right. And of course, it's not natural and right. It's a problem, It's really pressure on somebody, or it's hurtful for somebody. And so I have to remind myself, no, this is not an ordinary day, This is really a lot for someone to carry.
How might you do that? Is there something you could just take us through? Because I think a lot of us might find that news just hits us in the middle of a work day.
Yeah.
Our breath is taken away.
Yeah. And I think, some of it is very somatic. It's really learning what it feels like in your body when you're panicking, or when you feel, another one is hyper responsibility, like, I'm going to be the one to fix this, And even though you wouldn't necessarily associate that with a certain sensation, I think we can, if we just keep paying attention. And
for me, it's like a jumpiness. It's like my whole body is awake and just needs to go run 1,000,000 miles an hour.
Right, exactly. There's something, and we can learn it. And that becomes my signal. There's a certain something I feel, like this wave of energy coming up in my stomach, and then something else settles, like, oh, this is right. And that's my signal to say, well, it's not really right. This is a big problem for somebody, and I can't fix it. I will do everything I can to be present, to care, whatever is called for, if I have some skill that is called for. And I can't imagine that I am in control, because then we're sunk. It's just not true. And there's that certain feeling when I'm taking in someone's suffering
Mm-hmm.
as though we're mine to address rather than theirs with me in some kind of presence or solidarity. And I can feel the difference.
How? Do you feel it in your body?
I feel it in my body, and then that is my signal to say to myself, whatever. And usually humor is a good technique, like, who put you in charge of the universe? I remember I once said in front of a group of people, I felt like if I were in charge of the universe, it would be a lot better a world. And someone in the class said, are you sure? And so I thought for a moment, and I said, I am really sure. So sometimes I say to myself, are you sure?
Hey you, I'm Andrew Seaman. Do you want a new job? Or do you want to move forward in your career? Well, you should listen to my weekly show called Get Hired with Andrew Seaman. We talk about it all, and it's waiting for you, yes you, wherever you get your podcasts.
Small and medium businesses don't have time to waste, and neither do marketers trying to reach them. On LinkedIn, more SMB decision makers are actively looking for new solutions to help them grow, whether it's software or financial services. Our Meet the SMB report breaks down how these businesses buy and what really influences their choices. Learn more at linkedin.com/meet-the-SMB. That's linkedin.com/meet-the-SMB.
It's funny because I have interviewed Jerry Colonna on the show, and I know that he's studied with you as well.
Yeah.
And he is a sort of recovering hypervigilant, I think he would say. And it sounds like what you're advocating for is for those of us who might want to jump into hypervigilance and take on everyone else's anxiety as well as assume actions, is to take a breath.
Yeah. Well, it's the pause. That's the most important thing, however you do it, because, and it's also, like I work a lot with caregivers, whether it's in their families, and parents, children, or it's professionally, and people who are really on the front lines of suffering. And it's because they care. It's because of the tenderness in their hearts that they do want to take it on. And then they crash inevitably. And people then blame themselves, like I'm too weak to do this, or, I don't have the strength, or I don't know why it got so out of control, and really that's the extra layer, of suffering, because it's because of one's caring that we end up in that position. But we need to learn some boundaries. We need to learn some balance. We need to learn to care for ourselves as well as for others.
Is there an exercise that you might offer them? One of the things I love about a lot of your work is that you have these sort of quick meditations that you can do. I mean, what would you tell someone who's caring too much right now, but has to show up at work anyway?
Sometimes it really is boundary setting, and so it might be asking yourself, where is what can I not control?
Yeah.
What can I actually affect and what can I not control? And sometimes I literally remind myself it's out of my hands, and, I will do everything. And the idea of loving kindness or compassion for somebody is that it's like a gift. And we give it with the best intention and the wish that somebody use it and enjoy it. But you can't make them put on that sweater, and say, this is the best thing I've ever gotten. Or, read that book you wrote and say, I can't believe, the genius. It's like, we would like that, but it doesn't always happen. And so I remind myself sometimes this is a freely given gift. I'm making this offering. And the hardest thing sometimes for people is to feel that some compassion for themselves is worthy, that it's not selfish, it's not being lazy, and because we have such impossibly perfectionistic standards. I'm talking about the root of anxiety, It's like, how could we ever be good enough,
Do you find this with caregivers in particular?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, it is that tenderness that leads them to the role often. And then partly because those roles, whether it's personal or professional, tend to be quite under-resourced
Yep.
in society.
AKA paid less.
Exactly. Paid less, honored less, recognized less. There's a lot of less, That could be a long list. And then it's a struggle, and you can't ask yourself for the impossible. But we do. And then if you do make a mistake, back to failure, or you snap, you get exhausted, you get overwhelmed, you get reactive, then, you feel so terrible. But I think a lot of one's practice, in life is sort of picking yourself up and starting over, but not sort of dwelling incessantly.
Mm-hmm. But that's what perfectionists are great at, too.
Oh, totally. Totally. Like if you were the kind of person if you were in the habit of evaluating yourself, like at the end of the day, like how did I do today? Let's just say you're the kind of person who only remembers the mistakes you made and what you didn't say so clearly and what you could have been better at, let's just say. Sometimes you ask yourself, anything else happened today?
Right. Could you actually ask yourself that?
Oh, yeah. One of the things we talk about a lot as a kind of healing modality is a gratitude reflection. Like, write down at the end of the day 3 things that you're grateful for from the day. And they don't have to be magnificent or grandiose. And some people really don't like that. They think it's like sentimental and it's something that makes you, happy to get crumbs and you never confront an unfair system or something like that. But actually research shows that it's like a power, because if you're exhausted, if you feel depleted, if you feel you have nothing going in your life, you have nothing to give, you're not going to be that useful,
No.
So the things that are kind of restorative for us and pick up our energy and give us a little buoyancy and those are important in our continued connection to others. So it's not really selfish. And it's shown that gratitude is a formidable force in that way because it kind of rounds out the picture. It's not to say there are no problems or no real sources of suffering at all, but we need to kind of be nourished. We need to have some resilience. And so how do we meet the moment, And so I always say it can be a small thing, but write it down. And I also say, as is true, that's not my natural conditioning. My personal conditioning, my family's conditioning, my cultural conditioning is such that I'm so much more likely to come to the end of the day and think about what I can complain about.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always like, I didn't show up in the right way. I didn't say the right thing, or that person wasn't really there for me, or back in the day when I was traveling incessantly, there was always an airline and, there's always a phone service or, one's computer program or something. And that's just where my attention goes. And so it is a very conscious decision, not through force or coercion, but through intentionality to say, okay, what else? What else happened today?
Right. So you're not telling people that they have to become all gratitude and no grumble. Like you could still ease yourself out of the grumble.
Yeah, or at least the word is balance,
What?
Yeah, I mean, grumble, which is a great term. It's inevitable, really. And it would be unreal to imagine, such sweetness.
I was reading about you in your business travel life, I guess back in the former times. And it's funny. It must be weird for a lot of people who read you and know you as the great teacher to think of you sort of suffering on Southwest Airlines with the rest of us, poor schleps. But you were saying that like it can be hard for you. The plane is late. You're going to miss your connection. You might not make it to that. And that makes you really anxious, just like it makes the rest of us.
Yeah. To the degree that I project into the future, because that was the problem sitting on the airplane, I'm going to be late. What's going to happen? I'm going to miss the lecture. I shouldn't have. And also a tremendous amount of self-blame, because that is my habit, like, I was so stupid. Why did I make this reservation? I should have known better, so there's always another channel for self-blame, like, why did I do that? No, I think my big resolve has been to try to be kinder, and that has included toward myself. So just things like, because there's space. So I take the time, like if I write an email, not to just press send right away, and to take a few breaths and then read it again. And then think, do I actually want to send it in this form? And often, it's such a strange form of communication. You can sound so terse and you didn't mean it. And so I rewrite it in some way. And then I press send. And just sort of taking the time in those ways has really been a delight.
Sharon, you've said, I think of anxiety and depression as a manifestation of a deep yearning we have as humans to be happy, free, have a sense of belonging. The yearning is the point. Don't feel squeamish or embarrassed. There's a wish to be happy underneath. Really?
Well, I think that's our basic human dilemma, that every one of us wants to be happy, not in a superficial way, like a pleasing day only, right. But a really deep sense of feeling at home somewhere in this body, in this mind, with one another, with this planet, on this planet. And the problem many, spiritual systems would say is not that yearning, it's not the desire, it's that we have bad aim. Either we have been taught myths and lies. If you only accumulate enough, endlessly, you'll be happy, you'll be safe. It's like all totems against change and death, like, let's get another one, let's get another car or painting or house or, orange or whatever it is. And depending on other habits, other reinforcements, we can sort of dive off the deep end of that. Or we've been taught we don't really count, we don't matter, we're not capable of. It's not the same as saying we're perfect, but we are capable of change and growth and understanding, every single one of us. And not all of us were brought up that way, with that reinforcement. And so we have that yearning, and it's so distorted because we really don't feel we're worthy of happiness. And there's so much conditioning around that. And then I honestly think these days, so many people have gone through some kind of trauma, which is sometimes sharp and clear, terrible incident, accident, horrible thing happened. Sometimes it's slower and chronic. Like, I've had people tell me that the most traumatic force in their lives was like growing up in poverty. I just think a lot about the residue on one's nervous system, and I think it's not a question of personal fault, and that there are ways of healing that. There are ways of coming to a greater state of balance, and that will give us a lot of inner strength.
You recommend 2 steps when you feel anxious. 1, distinguishing between anxiety and fear, and 2, applying an antidote. Talk us through that.
Well, given what we were just talking about, there are certain ways of breathing, for example, where researchers say that, the main thing is that your out breath needs to be longer than your in breath.
Why distinguish between anxiety and fear, though, first?
Well, I think it depends, like some people do and some people don't. Like, within the Buddhist psychology, which is something that I trained in, there are different energy imbalances that are talked about, and they're energy imbalances. And so if we have too much energy in our system for the amount of calm or concentration, we will get anxious. If we have too much calm for the amount of energy, we'll get kind of slothful, and disengaged. So anxiety is not seen as like a flaw or got to clean up your act kind of thing, or Why are you so upset? You need to learn, it's like an energy imbalance.
Wow.
And so the remedy, the antidote in that way would be trying to change the balance. It's not talking yourself out of it, and it's not trying to talk yourself down. It's changing the actual balance so that the energy kind of calms down or gets channeled and is not so kind of free floating, and so that the calm deepens. And so the fear, I think, would be much more specific. Anxiety is like that imbalance, and the fear is taking cognitive form. Like,
Right.
I'm not going to be able to pay my rent next year.
Right. Got it.
Something like that. And that, fear isn't all bad either. That might point to things in life that really need to shift, but it also can. The thing I say about fear, for example, that I've learned is that we can get very personal insights into the roots of fear for ourselves. So what I've seen sitting in meditation, just looking at fear, and that means looking at it in my body. What does it feel like? Kind of watching the fear movie play out. No, commentary, no judgment, just like, what's happening? Well, how does this work in me? What I've seen is that despite the world's pronouncement, which is also true, that we're afraid of the unknown. I'm actually not that afraid of the unknown. I'm afraid when I think I do know, and it's going to be really bad. And so that's the place where I do tell stories to myself. That's the catastrophizing, like I'm going back to my apartment in New York City, where I've been paying rent, by the way, all this time. And, I haven't been there in 8 months. And I heard that if you turn on the water, in the sink after 8 months or 10 months or a year, that you can get Legionnaire's disease. What are the symptoms of Legionnaire's disease? How will I know? And then if I remind myself, you know what? You don't know. This is just imagination. Then I relax and I feel space. I think, hey, I don't know. So for me, those stories are more the root of the fear than anything.
My last question for you is a favor for our listeners who get anxious because they are anxious. Right? So many of us live with anxiety, and especially during the workday, I think, because this is a show about work, we get so scared that something is going to make us panic and take us off track that we just get frozen, I guess. And I'm curious if you could author a short meditation or breath piece or just something that they could use.
Sure. Like what I was saying before was that there are often in meditation with the breath, we just use the normal natural breath, and that's fine because that will be grounding and help. But there are certain breath tools that are described by researchers as moving the emphasis away from the sympathetic nervous system to the parasympathetic nervous system. So your panic will start to ease, your blood pressure will go down, things like that. And so that is the major rule of that. There are many fancy ways of doing it, but the major thing is that your out breath needs to be longer than your in breath. And your whole system will start to change. So we can do a few moments, if you like, of a practice, because it can be inclusive of other things. The whole idea is we've got this energy. It's kind of running wild. We want to balance it out, with greater centeredness or more groundedness. And then we have the benefit of the energy, actually, without it being so intense. So you can sit comfortably. You can close your eyes or not. You don't have to. And we'll take a few just normal breaths without trying to change it or manipulate it in any way. See where you feel the breath most distinctly. The nostrils, the chest, or the abdomen. And then for a few moments, see if you can breathe in that way that I described, where the out breath is longer than the in breath. You can do it, people's breath length is different, but maybe breathe in to the count of 3, breathe out to the count of 5, or something like that, whatever works for you. Feel what's happening in your body. Feel what's happening to kind of that energy that you may have been feeling. And even with your eyes closed, if they are, notice what you're seeing. You may see, with eyes closed, different patterns of light or different shadings. If your eyes are open, of course, you see whatever is in front of you. Notice what you see. Notice what you hear. Like I'm noticing the sound of the rain right now. Feel your body posture, like sitting. Feel your hands touching, or maybe your hands touching your knee, someplace where there's already contact. And then you can start again. Normal breath, and then the kind of conscious breath, or the out breath longer than the in breath. And then a little tour of our sensory impressions. Okay, thank you.
Sharon Salzberg, I just want to thank you very much. And
Thank you so much. Thank you for doing this.
that's it for this episode of The Anxious Achiever. The show is produced and edited by Mary Dew, with production support and sound engineering by Nick Krinko. If you like what you heard, head to your favorite podcast app. Leave us a review. It really matters, and we appreciate the time and effort it takes. And if you don't subscribe or follow the show already, now's the time. And let us know what you'd like to hear more of. I get some of my best ideas from my listeners, so find me on LinkedIn, send me a message. You can find my weekly newsletter there as well. A big thanks to LinkedIn and all the listeners out there and our guests in the Anxious Achiever world. Until next time.